In this lecture, we're going to take a look at 3 ways someone can build a monopoly out of their business and decide if that's really a good thing. When we talk about a monopoly, let's first start by thinking about the board game and what is the goal of the game. When you're playing the game, you want to take over as many properties as you can so that all of your opponents really have no choice but to land on one of your properties and pay you. You make money, they lose money, and that's how you win the game. And with a business, they also want to develop a monopoly. And it's the same idea, where the customers seem to have no choice but to go to you. Okay, well, how exactly do you make that happen? There are 3 ways that businesses can try to develop a monopoly. And one is by setting up a corporation. And on this map, we see examples of various corporations that exist in the United States today. Corporations are not the way that a lot of people will initially set up a business. Initially, many people will set up a sole proprietorship. And the reason why they set up a sole proprietorship is because it is easy and it is inexpensive. And here we see some examples of people who traditionally will set up a sole proprietorship. The florist right here. One of the reasons why people will set up a sole proprietorship is because you get to keep all of the money. Every cent that comes in belongs to the business, belongs to you. You and the business are the same thing. Here's the downside to that. You are going to have difficulty raising a lot of money. If any one of these people wants to expand their business, let's say the hairstylist and the florist want to be closer downtown, or the attorney wants to buy some software for the business, or the landscaper wants to buy a piece of equipment. They're all limited by how much money they personally have. Well, what if you didn't have to be limited? What if you could change the way your business is set up, and instead of being that sole proprietorship, what if you set it up as a corporation? Now, there are some downsides. There is a bit more paperwork involved, there's some money, but the biggest reason why some people don't like the idea of a corporation is because you are no longer completely in control of your business. If you set up a corporation, you do not own the business anymore. Legally, the business is a person. McDonald's, under the law, is a person. So is Target and the other examples that we see here. So why exactly is it that people will set up the corporation then, if you no longer actually own your business? And one of the biggest reasons is because it is much easier to raise money so you can expand your business. The way that you do that is by selling stock. When people talk about buying stock in a company, they're talking about buying a piece of that company, or they're buying ownership in that company. So if you buy one piece of stock in a company like Google, you can say that you are an owner of Google. Not the owner, you're not the only one, but you do own part of that company. And the people who do that, the investors, we call them either shareholders because you're sharing with others your holdings in that company, you're sharing your investment, or we call them stockholders because the piece of the company itself is referred to as a share of stock. So let's do an example. Let's say that you decide you want to expand your business. Maybe you are the landscaper or the florist, and you know that you need to make your business grow. So you decide to incorporate it, and then you will sell some shares of stock. And let's say, just for simplicity, that each share is worth $100. Somebody decides they want to invest in your company, and they're going to buy 10 shares of stock. That means they own 10 pieces of the company. And you can make as many pieces of the company as you want to. And then once you sell those 10 shares of stock for $1,000, the corporation, the business, now has that money. They have a lot more money that they can grow. That's the big advantage to a corporation. You can grow as a business more easily. What about the investor? What do they get? There are 2 things. One, the investor may get some dividends, which is basically a thank you from the corporation.
The people who are running the corporation may decide to give out dividends, like $2 for every shareholder. So if you own 10 shares of stock, we are going to send you $20 just because the business is doing well, and we thank you for investing. It's not a whole lot of money, but that's not the way you really make money. The other reason, or the other thing that investors get, is the chance to make some money. Let's say that our landscaper here buys that new piece of equipment, business is going phenomenally well, and more people want to buy shares of stock in his company. That means the value of each share is going up, and it's not worth $100 anymore. What if it's now worth $200? If you invested in that company and you bought a share of stock at $100, but now it's worth $200, you can sell it, and you just made some money without actually having to work at it. So there's your chance to make some money. You can sell your shares of stock at any time and make as much money as you happen to make. There is a downside. There's always a chance that you could lose money instead, but it is a risk that entrepreneurs will often take. So, to recap, corporations incorporating a business can be good for investors. They have the chance to make money, and good for the corporation because it allows businesses to grow. That's how they turn into big businesses and perhaps develop a monopoly. Let's now look at the second way that people can hopefully develop a monopoly with their business, and that is horizontal integration. Horizontal integration is actually pretty easy. What it is when you buy out your competition, and when you do that, when you buy your competition, customers have no choice but to use your business. So we see some examples here of media services where you think you're looking at individual or different companies, but really they're the same. Disney, for example. Disney owns the History Channel. Disney owns ABC. Disney owns Marvel and ESPN and Hulu. So even though they have different names, really it's all owned by Disney. Let's look at an example. So if you look at these four companies, they basically provide the same product to people, just different names for them. So let's say that Nike is doing really well and Nike decides it is going to buy Adidas. If Nike buys Adidas, that is horizontal integration. They are buying out the competition. People can still go to a store and buy something that says Adidas, but you're not really giving your money to Adidas because Nike owns them. Then business goes well. Maybe Nike now is going to purchase Under Armour. And it's the same thing. You can still go to a store and buy Under Armour or perhaps buy Reebok. But if Nike bought all of those companies, really all of that money is going to Nike. They have horizontally integrated. So that is another way that a business can develop a monopoly. The final way is something called vertical integration. And the easiest way to think about this is to actually start by what is not vertical integration. And for this, let's think about that unit that you just did on the American West. Think about those ranchers down in Texas who have the big farms where they're raising livestock and they're raising cattle, but that $4 cow on a ranch isn't doing them any good. They need to get it somewhere to sell it. And that is where the cowboys come in. And that is the first expense that the rancher has to take on. So as you go through this, think about all of these different middlemen who are involved in getting that cow from Texas to perhaps a steakhouse in New York City. So the rancher hires the cowboys to take the cattle on the long drive. And he has to pay the cowboys, obviously. So now that $4 cow is more expensive. Let's say that it's now $8 because it has to be, you have to charge more for it because you have to pay the cowboys. The cowboys then take the cattle up to the cow town where they're going to get loaded onto a train. And again, the rancher has to pay for that. Let's say it's $10 for each cow that gets onto the train. And so now the railroad company is making some money and the rancher has to continue raising his prices. After the railroads take the cows up to the slaughterhouses of Chicago, again, the rancher is paying for the cows to actually get slaughtered. So now we're up to $24. After the animals have been slaughtered, they then have to be taken out to cities along the East Coast. And again, that's going to happen through a train. So we're paying the railroads again. And now it's up to $34 for that $4 cow because of all of these middlemen who are involved. They are all providing services. By the time customers are actually buying that piece of meat, they're paying essentially $40. What if you could lower your costs, though? What if that rancher didn't have to do one of these? What if he could lower the costs, and as a way of lowering costs, you bring in more customers? Let's just keep it simple and say all he did was he bought that first railroad. So right here, after the cattle have been on the long drive, this railroad that will take them to the slaughterhouses, what if the rancher owns that and he doesn't have to pay the $10 per cow to ship them up to the slaughterhouses? He's saving that money and lowering his costs. And now, because he can charge less for his product, more people will likely buy his product. So he's getting more customers, more money, more business. And as all of that is coming to him, he's lowering his costs and his competition is hurting. If he can take over these steps in the production process, the rancher is vertically integrating his company. That's how he's lowering the costs, and that is how he is probably going to be able to develop a monopoly. Now, a monopoly. What do we think about this? There are pros and cons to what is known as consolidation. If you think about consolidating things, think about just in a classroom. Let's say that there's one cup where there are pencils over by the windows, and then there's another cup in the room that has pencils and that's over by the door, and then there's another cup that has pencils and it's up by the front board. If we consolidate that, we take all of the different cups of pencils and put them all into one. And that's what some businesses are doing here. That's how you're building monopoly. You're taking a lot of businesses and they're all coming together as one company that's in charge. There are some reasons why it's okay. One of the reasons why consolidation or concentration or monopoly building is okay is because it can provide stability to an industry. You know exactly what you're getting. It's very predictable. However, there are a lot more cons to it. One of the reasons why people don't like monopolies is because when you decrease competition, you're getting rid of your competitors. Prices often go up. Think about those farmers out on the Great Plains. There was no competition for the railroad companies in the Great Plains. They could charge whatever they wanted to, and they did. So if there's a lack of competition, prices often go up. Production can also decrease because that company has total control over the business, and when they produce less of something, the value of it goes up. People will pay more because there isn't as much. There are also fewer jobs very often because it's only one business that controls everything. And lastly, it can lead to corruption. People doing dishonest things to make sure that they remain the only game in town. I will be the only monopoly. So there are a few pros, but really the cons significantly outweigh it. And that is when people begin to turn against monopolies and they start asking the U.S. government to do something about them.